Document. Part 6. The victory over the Vorthok mining base brought a brief moment of peace to Redridge, but it was fragile at best. The townsfolk worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the battle-clearing debris, rebuilding structures, and tending to the wounded. Despite their exhaustion, there was a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. For once, humanity had stood its ground against an overwhelming force. Nathan and Emily spent much of their time analyzing the remnants of the alien equipment left behind after the attack. They set up a makeshift lab in Nathan's garage, sorting through shards of metal, circuit boards, and strange energy cores that pulsed faintly with an eerie blue light. Their goal was simple: understand the technology well enough to turn it against the Vorthok if they returned. "This could be useful," Emily said one afternoon, holding up a small device shaped like a disc. Its surface shimmered as though liquid flowed beneath it. "If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can use it to jam their communications again." Nathan nodded, examining another piece of wreckage, a jagged fragment of hull plating, or make better traps. "These materials are stronger than anything we've got. If we reinforce our decoys with this stuff, the aliens won't know what hit them." While they worked, the Shadow Walkers remained ever present in the background. Every night, glowing eyes could be seen watching from the edges of the forest, silently observing the humans' efforts. Occasionally, one would approach the outskirts of town, leaving behind offerings, strange artifacts, or fragments of alien teches, if acknowledging their shared struggle. It was clear the creatures saw themselves not just as protectors, but as allies. But even with the Shadow Walkers' support, Nathan knew the fight wasn't over. The Vorthok were too determined, too resourceful to give up so easily. He often found himself staring at the horizon, half expecting to see their ships descending once more. Each quiet day felt like borrowed time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Nathan and Emily gathered with a group of volunteers in the community center. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, detailing every trap, patrol route, and potential weak point in the Vorthok defenses. Max lay curled up near the door, his ears twitching at every sound outside. "We need to stay ahead of them," Nathan began, addressing the room. "They'll regroup eventually, and when they do, we can't afford to be caught off guard." "But how?" asked Frank, the skeptical farmer who still struggled to believe in the Shadow Walker's existence. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on supplies. We can't keep fighting like this forever." "He's right," added Sarah, her voice tinged with worry. "Every battle takes its toll. What happens when we run out of people willing to risk their lives?" Emily stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. "That's why we have to adapt. We've learned a lot from the Shadow Walkers, not just about fighting, but about survival. If we combine their strategies with our own ingenuity, we might stand a chance." Nathan nodded, pointing to a map pinned to the wall. "Our best bet is to focus on sabotage. Hit their supply lines, disable their equipment, and keep them guessing. If we can disrupt their operations enough, they'll either retreat or make a mistake we can exploit." The group agreed, though the weight of the task ahead hung heavy in the air. As the meeting broke up, Nathan pulled Emily aside. "There's something else we need to consider," he said quietly. "What happens if the Vorthok bring reinforcements? More ships, more weapons. We can't rely solely on traps and guerrilla tactics." Emily frowned, thinking for a moment. "Then we'll need to take the fight to them. Find their main ship, the one running the operation, and destroy it. Without leadership, their forces will fall apart." It was a bold plan, perhaps too bold, but Nathan couldn't deny its logic. If we're going to pull it off, we'll need intel, information on their command structure, their movements, everything, and we'll need the Shadow Walkers' help. The next morning, Nathan and Emily ventured back into the forest, heading toward the caverns, where the Shadow Walkers dwelled. Armed with their tapping tools and newfound knowledge of the creature's language, They hoped to convince them to join the assault on the Vorthok mothership as they descended into the depths of the caves. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and metal. The walls were lined with carvings, symbols, and images that told stories of past battles fought by the Shadow Walkers. Some depicted victories, others showed devastating losses, but all conveyed a single message: resilience. When they reached the central chamber, they found several Shadow Walkers waiting, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. One of the creatures stepped forward, tilting its head as if studying them. Nathan took a deep breath and began tapping out a sequence on the cavern floor. "Enemies come again," he signaled. "Stronger now. Need your strength." The Shadow Walker paused, then responded with a series of taps. Emily translated quickly, jotting notes in her journal. "They want to know why we fight. What makes us different from the invaders?" Nathan exchanged a glance with Emily before replying. Together, they tapped out a response. "This is our home, our world. We protect it because it belongs to us." For a long moment, the Shadow Walker said nothing. Then, with deliberate slowness, it tapped out a reply. "We will hunt." Relief washed over Nathan and Emily as they realized the creatures had agreed to help. But the Shadow Walker wasn't finished. It gestured toward the metallic shards they had brought with them, signaling for them to place the objects on the ground. When they did, the creature studied them closely, its claws clicking softly against the alien tech. They recognized this. Emily whispered, excitement coloring her voice. "They've seen it before, maybe even used parts of it themselves." The Shadow Walker tapped out another sequence. "Weapons, fear. They think these pieces can be turned into weapons," Emily explained. "Something powerful enough to hurt the invaders." Nathan nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "If we can figure out how to weaponize this stuff, we'll have a real advantage." With the Shadow Walker's blessing and their promise to aid in the upcoming battle, they returned to Redridge, eager to share the news. Over the next few days, the townsfolk worked tirelessly to modify the alien tech into usable tools. Some fashioned crude explosives using the energy cores, while others built handheld devices capable of emitting bursts of electromagnetic interference. Though rudimentary, the creations gave them hope. Meanwhile, Nathan and Emily scouted the Vorthok's remaining positions, gathering information on their movements and identifying potential targets. They discovered that the invaders had established a new base deeper in the mountains, heavily fortified and guarded by drones. At its center loomed the mothership, a massive vessel that dwarfed anything else in the sky. "This is it," Nathan said one evening, as he and Emily reviewed their findings. "If we hit this ship hard enough, we can cripple their entire operation. But getting close won't be easy," Emily replied, her brow furrowed. "Their defenses are tight. We'll need a distraction, something big enough to draw their attention away." Nathan smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." The night of the attack arrived sooner than anyone expected. Under cover of darkness, the townsfolk moved into position, armed with their makeshift weapons and guided by the Shadow Walkers. Nathan led a small team tasked with creating the diversion, a coordinated assault on the outer perimeter of the Vorthok base, designed to lure their forces away from the mothership. As explosions rocked the hills and Shadow Walkers tore through the enemy ranks, Emily and a second team slipped past the chaos unnoticed. Flanked by two of the creatures, she made her way toward the heart of the base, clutching a backpack filled with modified alien tech. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve never wavered. When they reached the mothership, the sight was towering monolith of sleek metal and pulsating lights. Guards patrolled the area, but the Shadow Walkers dealt with them swiftly, their movements silent and lethal. Within minutes, Emily and her team were inside, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the alien vessel. Using the data they had gathered, they located the ship's power core, a massive sphere humming with energy. Emily set to work, attaching the modified tech to key points around the core. Sweat dripped down her face as she worked, her fingers trembling with fatigue and adrenaline. "Almost done," she muttered under her breath. Behind her, the Shadow Walkers stood guard, their glowing eyes scanning for threats. Finally, she connected the last device and activated the sequence. A low hum filled the air as the core began to destabilize. Alarms blared throughout the ship, red lights flashing wildly. "Let's go," Emily shouted, grabbing her gear and sprinting toward the exit. The Shadow Walkers followed, their speed unmatched as they guided her through the chaos. Outside, Nathan watched as the mothership shuddered violently, smoke billowing from its vents. With a deafening roar, the vessel erupted in a brilliant explosion of light and fire, sending shockwaves rippling across the valley. Cheers erupted from the townsfolk as the remaining Vorthok forces scrambled to retreat, for the first time in weeks. Hope truly blossomed in Redridge. The invaders were broken, their leadership shattered. But as Nathan and Emily stood side by side, gazing at the wreckage of the mothership, they knew the fight wasn't truly over. Somewhere in the S. Document. Part 5. The aftermath of the battle left Redridge in a state of cautious optimism. The townsfolk worked tirelessly to clean up the wreckage scattered across the forest and fields, twisted metal from alien ships, charred trees, and fragments of Shadow Walker traps that had been triggered during the fight. Though the victory was undeniable, it came at a cost. Several volunteers had been injured, and one elderly man named Harold had lost his barn when an alien ship crashed into it. Still, spirits were high. For the first time since the Vorthok arrived, people felt like they had a fighting chance. Nathan and Emily spent the following days coordinating with the townsfolk to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. They knew the Vorthok wouldn't give up Islanot after suffering such heavy losses. Every hour was precious, and every task mattered. Some residents built stronger traps, using designs inspired by the Shadow Walker's methods. Others patrolled the woods, keeping watch for any sign of enemy movement. Meanwhile, Nathan and Emily focused on deepening their connection with the creatures. Each night, they ventured back into the caverns, tapping out messages and waiting for responses. The Shadow Walkers were unpredictable, sometimes appearing immediately, and other times remaining hidden for hours. But gradually, trust began to form. One evening, as Nathan tapped out a sequence meaning allies, a Shadow Walker stepped forward and placed a clawed hand on the ground, mimicking the rhythm. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "They're starting to see us as partners," Emily said, her voice filled with quiet awe. She scribbled notes furiously in her journal, documenting every interaction, not just humans who stumbled into their territory, but actual collaborators. "Good," Nathan replied, though his expression remained serious, "because we're going to need all the help we can get." Their next challenge came sooner than expected. Early one morning, as fog rolled through the hills, a group of scouts reported seeing increased activity near the Vorthak's main base, a sprawling mining operation carved into the side of a mountain. Drones buzzed overhead, and larger ships descended periodically, unloading supplies and equipment. It was clear the aliens were regrouping, planning something big. "We need to hit them before they're ready," Nathan said during an emergency meeting at the community center. "If we let them rebuild their forces, we won't stand a chance." "But how?" asked Sarah, a young woman who had recently joined the patrols. "We don't have weapons like they do. We're outnumbered and outgunned. That's why. We use what we've got," Nathan explained, spreading out a map of the area, traps, decoys, and the element of surprise. "If we can lure them into vulnerable positions, the Shadow Walkers can finish them off." Emily nodded in agreement. "And if we strike fast enough, we might be able to cripple their operation entirely." The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. Over the next 2 days, the townsfolk worked around the clock to set up an elaborate network of traps along the perimeter of the Vorthok base, using materials scavenged from abandoned sheds and junkyards. They constructed devices designed to disable drones and disrupt communications. Some traps involved nets strung between trees, while others relied on explosives rigged to old propane tanks. Each one was carefully camouflaged to blend into the environment. Meanwhile, Nathan and Emily focused on coordinating with the Shadow Walkers. Returning to the caverns, they tapped out a message explaining their strategy and asking for assistance. To their relief, the creatures responded almost immediately. One Shadow Walker tilted its head, studying them intently, before tapping out a reply. The sequence translated roughly to "We will hunt." "That's a yes," Emily whispered, turning to Nathan with a grin. "They're in." As night fell, the final preparations were made. Volunteers gathered at the edge of the forest, armed with flashlights, walkie-talkies, and whatever tools they could carry. Max trotted alongside Nathan, his tail wagging despite the tension in the air. Emily double-checked her backpack, ensuring she had everything she needed: her notebook, a flashlight, and a small pouch containing the metallic shards they had collected from destroyed drones. They might come in handy later. "Everyone knows their roles?" Nathan asked, addressing the group. A chorus of nods answered him. "Good. Stay sharp, and remember, stick to the plan. We're not here to fight. We're here to guide the Shadow Walkers to their targets." With that, they moved out. The journey to the Vorthok base was tense and silent, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or distant hum of alien machinery. As they approached, the scale of the operation became clear. Massive drills tore into the mountainside, sending clouds of dust billowing into the air. Guard drones circled the area, their red sensors scanning for threats. It was a fortress, and breaching it would require precision. Nathan signaled for the group to split up, each team heading to a designated trap location. He and Emily stayed together, positioning themselves near the largest decoy, a crude replica of an alien ship made from scrap metal and painted with reflective paint to mimic the shimmering surface of the real vessels. Once everything was in place, they activated the decoy's speaker system, emitting a low-frequency hum designed to mimic the sound of an approaching Vorthok ship. It didn't take long for the ruse to work. Within minutes, a swarm of drones appeared, drawn to the noise. They hovered uncertainly over the decoy, their sensors flickering as they tried to identify it. Just as one drone moved closer to investigate, a net launched from the trees, tangling it in thick ropes. The other drones reacted instantly, firing lasers at the source of the attack. That's when the Shadow Walkers struck. From the darkness emerged a wave of glowing eyes and chitinous armor. The creatures moved with terrifying speed, leaping onto the drones and tearing them apart with razor-sharp claws. Chaos erupted as more Shadow Walkers poured into the clearing, targeting anything that moved. Explosions lit up the night as traps detonated, sending shock waves through the valley. Nathan and Emily watched from a safe distance, their hearts pounding as the battle unfolded. The Vorthok scrambled to respond, deploying larger units equipped with heavy weaponry. But even these reinforcements were no match for the Shadow Walkers' sheer ferocity. One creature tackled a tank-sized machine, ripping open its hull with ease. Another scaled a drilling rig, dismantling it piece by piece until the entire structure collapsed in a shower of sparks. Despite the carnage, Nathan kept his focus. "We need to disable their communication array," he shouted over the din, pointing to a tower mounted on a nearby ridge. "If we cut off their ability to call for backup, we can end this." Emily nodded, already moving toward the tower. Together, they navigated the chaos, dodging falling debris and bursts of laser fire. When they reached the base of the tower, Nathan pulled out a crowbar and began prying open a panel. Inside, a tangle of wires and circuits glowed faintly, pulsating with energy. "Which one do we cut?" he asked, glancing at Emily. She examined the setup quickly, her mind racing. "The red one, it's the main power line. Cutting it should shut the whole thing down." Without hesitation, Nathan severed the wire. The tower shuddered, then went dark, plunging the Vorthok base into confusion. Without their communication systems, the aliens' coordination faltered. Orders went unanswered, and their forces became disorganized, making them easier prey for the Shadow Walkers. By dawn, the battle was over. The Vorthok had retreated, abandoning much of their equipment in their haste to escape. Smoke rose from the ruins of their base, and the air smelled of burnt metal and scorched earth. Exhausted but triumphant, the townsfolk gathered to assess the damage. "We did it," Emily said softly, leaning against Nathan as they surveyed the scene. Her face was streaked with dirt, and her hands trembled slightly, but her smile was bright. "We actually did it." "For now," Nathan replied, his tone measured. "But this isn't the end. They'll come back stronger next time." Emily nodded, her expression sobering. "Then we'll be ready too." In the distance, the Shadow Walkers lingered briefly, before vanishing into the forest once more. Their job was done for now, but everyone knew their alliance was fragile. Trust had been earned, but it would take constant effort to maintain. As the sun rose over Redridge, casting golden light over the battered landscape, Nathan and Emily shared a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, they truly believed they had a chance to win, not just for themselves, but for humanity. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the Shadow Walkers waited, their glowing eyes watching silently, ready to strike again if needed. Document Part 4. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Nathan and Emily. Armed with their newfound knowledge of the Shadow Walkers' communication methods, they began experimenting with ways to strengthen their connection. They spent hours in Nathan's garage, building crude replicas of the tapping patterns, using wooden boards and metal rods. Emily meticulously recorded every sequence they had learned, cross-referencing them with the symbols carved into the cavern walls. It was slow, painstaking work, but neither of them complained. They knew the stakes were high. Meanwhile, tension in Redridge continued to rise. The presence of the Vorthok loomed over the town like a storm cloud. Strange lights flickered in the sky at night, and the hum of alien machinery echoed through the hills. Some residents claimed to have seen more of the insect-like drones patrolling the outskirts of the forest, while others whispered about strange noises coming from the woods, growls, screeches, and the sound of metal being torn apart. Few dared to venture outside after dark. Nathan and Emily decided it was time to share what they had discovered with the townsfolk. Gathering everyone in the community center, they explained everything: the alien ship, the Shadow Walkers, the carvings in the caves, and their attempts to communicate. Predictably, not everyone believed them. "You're telling us there are monsters living underground who want to help us fight aliens?" asked Frank, a grizzled old farmer who always seemed skeptical of anything out of the ordinary. "Sounds like something out of a movie." "It's true," Nathan insisted, his voice firm despite the murmurs of disbelief rippling through the crowd. "Emily and I have seen them. We've talked to them in a way. They're intelligent, and they don't like the aliens any more than we do. And how exactly do you plan to fight these things?" Another man chimed in, crossing his arms. "We're just regular people. What chance do we have against flying machines and laser guns?" "That's where the Shadow Walkers come in," Emily said, stepping forward. Her calm demeanor helped quiet the room. "They're already attacking the aliens, but they need our help. If we can work together, we might stand a chance." Reluctantly, the townspeople agreed to listen. Over the next few days, Nathan and Emily organized patrols around the edges of the forest, teaching volunteers how to recognize signs of both the Vorthok and the Shadow Walkers. They also began constructing decoys and traps inspired by the ones they'd found in the caves. Using scrap metal and salvaged materials, they fashioned crude replicas of alien drones, hoping to lure the real ones into vulnerable positions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan and Emily returned to the forest with a small group of volunteers. Their mission was simple: set up one of the decoys near a known Vorthok patrol route and see if it drew any attention. Max trotted alongside them, his keen nose sniffing the air for danger. They worked quickly, positioning the decoy in a clearing surrounded by dense underbrush. Emily attached a small speaker to it, programmed to emit the same hum the alien drones made. Once everything was in place, they retreated to a safe distance, hiding among the trees to observe. For a while, nothing happened. The forest remained eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then, just as Nathan was starting to think the plan had failed, a faint worry noise broke the stillness. Moments later, 2 Vorthok drones appeared, hovering silently above the clearing. Their red sensors scanned the area, focusing on the decoy. "They bought it," Emily whispered, barely able to contain her excitement. But before anyone could celebrate, a low growl rumbled through the trees. The Shadow Walkers emerged from the shadows, moving with terrifying speed and precision. One of the creatures leaped onto a drone, its claws tearing through the sleek metal casing with ease. Sparks flew as the drone struggled to break free, but it was no match for the Shadow Walker's raw strength. Within seconds, the drone was reduced to a pile of twisted wreckage. The second drone tried to flee, but another Shadow Walker intercepted it midair, slamming it into the ground with enough force to leave a crater. The impact sent shockwaves through the forest, shaking the very earth beneath Nathan and Emily's feet. "Well?" one of the volunteers muttered, awestruck. "Those things are incredible." "They're not just fighting the aliens," Nathan said quietly. "They're protecting us too." As the Shadow Walkers disappeared back into the forest, the group hurried to retrieve the remains of the drones. Nathan examined the wreckage, marveling at the technology. "If we can figure out how this stuff works, maybe we can use it against them." Emily nodded, though her expression was thoughtful. "We should focus on learning more about the Shadow Walkers first. They're our best chance of survival." Over the next week, Nathan and Emily redoubled their efforts to communicate with the creatures. They returned to the caverns multiple times, practicing the tapping patterns and refining their understanding of the Shadow Walkers' language. Slowly but surely, progress was made. The creatures began responding more frequently, even guiding them to new areas of the caves where additional carvings and artifacts were hidden. One discovery stood out above. The rest a massive chamber deep within the cavern system, filled with piles of metallic objects that looked suspiciously like remnants of past alien invasions. There were shards of broken ships, fragments of weapons, and even skeletal remains of creatures unlike anything they had ever seen. It was clear the Shadow Walkers had been defending their territory for centuries, perhaps millennia. "This changes everything," Emily said, her voice trembling with excitement as she examined one of the larger pieces of debris. "These things have been fighting wars long before humans even existed. They're warriors, and now they're fighting for us," Nathan added, his tone serious. "Which means we owe it to them to step up." With renewed determination, they shared their findings with the townsfolk. Inspired by the evidence, more people volunteered to help, contributing whatever skills they had to the cause. Some built traps, others gathered supplies, and a few even ventured into the forest to monitor Vorthok activity. For the first time since the aliens' arrival, hope began to spread through Redridge. But the Vorthok weren't idle. Commander Zilk, frustrated by the repeated failures of his forces, ordered a full-scale assault on the town. His goal was clear: eliminate all resistance and secure the resources they needed to complete their mission. As dawn broke over Redridge, the skies filled with the ominous hum of alien engines. Nathan and Emily watched from the edge of the forest as the Vorthok descended, their sleek ships casting long shadows over the landscape. The townsfolk scrambled to take cover, their makeshift defenses looking pitiful compared to the advanced weaponry of their enemies. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm them. Then, from the depths of the forest, came a sound that sent shivers down everyone's spines, a chorus of guttural growls, louder and more menacing than ever before. The Shadow Walkers emerged in mass, their glowing eyes reflecting the morning light as they charged toward the invaders. "They're here," Emily whispered, clutching Nathan's arm. "They're really here." The battle that followed was chaos. Shadow Walkers tore through Vorthok forces with brutal efficiency, their claws slicing through metal and flesh alike. The aliens fought back with lasers and explosives, but the creatures' agility and resilience made them nearly impossible to hit. Nathan and Emily joined the fray, leading groups of volunteers to activate traps and distract the enemy. Despite the odds, the tide began to turn. The Shadow Walkers' ferocity, combined with human ingenuity, proved to be a formidable combination. One by one, the Vorthok ships fell, crashing into the forest in fiery explosions. By the time the dust settled, the invaders had been pushed back, retreating into the hills with heavy losses as the survivors regrouped in the aftermath. Nathan looked around at the battered but determined faces of his fellow townsfolk. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but so did pride. Together, they had faced an unimaginable threat and survived. "They'll be back," Emily said softly, standing beside him. "This isn't over." "No," Nathan agreed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But next time, we'll be ready." In the distance, the Shadow Walkers melted back into the forest, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Their alliance with humanity had only just begun, and both sides knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. But for now, Redridge was safe, and for the first time in weeks, Nathan allowed himself to believe that they might actually stand a chance. Document Part 3. The days following their encounter with the Shadow Walker passed in a blur for Nathan and Emily. They spent hours poring over old books, maps, and local legends, trying to piece together anything that might help them understand the creatures better. Emily became obsessed with the idea of communication, how to reach out to beings so vastly different from humans. Nathan, on the other hand, focused on practicalities. If they were going to work with the Shadow Walkers, they needed to prove themselves useful. That meant learning how the creatures operated, what they feared, and most importantly, what they wanted. One evening, as they sat at Nathan's kitchen table, surrounded by papers and half-empty coffee mugs, Emily held up an old photograph she'd found in a dusty book about Native American folklore. It showed a group of tribal elders standing near a cave entrance, their faces solemn as they performed some kind of ritual. In the background, faint carvings could be seen etched into the stone walls. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to the carvings. "These symbols, they match the claw marks we've been finding in the forest." Nathan leaned closer, squinting at the image. Sure enough, the patterns were eerily similar. Lines intersected at sharp angles, forming shapes that looked almost like crude letters or pictographs. "You think these are messages?" he asked. "It's possible," Emily replied. "If the Shadow Walkers use these markings to communicate, maybe we can too. But first, we need to find where they're coming from." That was easier said than done. The forest around Redridge was vast and dense, full of hidden caves and underground tunnels. Many of the older residents claimed the hills were riddled with caverns, though few dared to explore them. Stories of people disappearing without a trace kept most folks away. Still, Nathan and Emily knew they had no choice but to try. The next morning, armed with flashlights, rope, and a map sketched hastily from Emily's research, they set out toward the northern edge of the woods. According to legend, there was a network of caves in that direction, places the Shadow Walkers supposedly called home. As they walked, the air grew cooler, and the trees loomed taller, their branches intertwining to block out the sunlight. It felt like stepping into another world entirely. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, they stumbled upon a narrow fissure in the ground, partially concealed by thick vines and moss. The opening was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. but the scent of damp earth and the faint sound of dripping water hinted at something larger below. "This has to be it," Emily whispered, her voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. Nathan nodded, tying one end of the rope securely around a nearby tree trunk. "Stay close," he said, handing her the other end, "and don't let go." With Max leading the way, they descended cautiously into the darkness. The passage twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing them to duck under low-hanging rocks and step carefully over slippery patches of mud. Every sound echoed loudly their footsteps, the occasional drip of water. Even their breathing seemed amplified in the confined space. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged into a massive cavern. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, like jagged teeth, and pools of water reflected the dim glow of their flashlights. But what caught their attention were the walls covered from floor to ceiling in intricate carvings. Some depicted battles between humans and monstrous figures, while others showed strange rituals involving fire and offerings. Each carving was more detailed than the last, telling a story that spanned centuries. "Do you see this?" Emily whispered, running her fingers lightly over the engravings. "It's like a history lesson. These aren't just random drawings, they're records." Nathan nodded, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. "Looks like the Shadow Walkers have been here for a long time. Longer than anyone thought." As they explored further, they noticed something unusual: a series of bones, arranged in deliberate patterns along the edges of the cavern. Some were animal, others human, but all had been carefully placed as if part of some ancient ceremony. Nearby, they found remnants of traps made from sharpened sticks and woven vines, designed to ensnare prey or, perhaps, intruders. "These things are smart," Nathan murmured, crouching down to examine one of the traps. "Smarter than I gave them credit for." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "If we want their help, we'll need to show them we're not a threat, maybe even allies." Before they could discuss further, a low rumble reverberated through the cavern. At first, they thought it might be the result of shifting rock, but then they heard it, a deep, guttural growl that sent shivers down their spines. Slowly, they turned their flashlights toward the source of the noise. From the shadows emerged not one, but 3 shadow walkers. Their armored bodies glistened faintly in the dim light, and their glowing eyes fixed on Nathan and Emily with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, one of the creatures stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. Emily raised her hands slowly, palms open to show she wasn't holding any weapons. "We mean no harm," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "We came to learn, to understand." The Shadow Walker tilted its head, studying her with an expression that was impossible to read. Then, to their surprise, it reached out with one of its clawed hands and tapped the wall behind them. The sound echoed sharply through the cavern, rhythmic and deliberate. "What's it doing?" Nathan whispered, keeping his flashlight trained on the creature. "I think it's communicating," Emily replied, her eyes widening as realization dawned. "Listen to the pattern, it's like Morse code." She quickly pulled out her notebook and began jotting down the sequence of taps. After a few moments, the Shadow Walker stopped and stepped back, watching them intently. Emily hesitated, then mimicked the rhythm by tapping lightly on the cavern wall. The response was immediate. One of the other creatures let out a low, chittering sound, almost like approval. "They're testing us," Nathan said, his voice filled with awe, "seeing if we can keep up." For the next hour, Emily and Nathan worked together to decipher the Shadow Walker's language. Each tap corresponded to a specific symbol on the walls, and each symbol told part of the story carved into the stone. By the time they finished, they had peacefully assembled a rudimentary vocabulary: words for danger, alliance, territory, and protection. When they finally emerged from the cavern hours later, exhausted but exhilarated, they realized they had taken the first step toward building a fragile bridge between species. The Shadow Walkers hadn't attacked them, hadn't driven them away. Instead, they had listened and responded. As they trudged back toward Redridge, Emily couldn't help but smile. "We're on to something big here," she said, glancing at Nathan. "Something that could change everything." He nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Yeah, but we've still got a long way to go. Convincing the townsfolk is going to be tough enough. Convincing the aliens, that's a whole other challenge." Little did they know, their efforts would soon be put to the test. Back in the heart of the forest, the Vorthok were growing increasingly restless. Their mining operation had stalled due to repeated attacks from unseen forces, and their commander Zilk was losing patience. He ordered scouts to double their patrols, determined to uncover the source of the resistance. Unbeknownst to him, the Shadow Walkers were already planning. Their next, Movand, Nathan, and Emily, were about to become key players in a battle far greater than either of them could have imagined. Document Part 2. The next day, Nathan and Emily set out early, armed with backpacks filled with supplies, flashlights, notebooks, a camera, and a few tools they thought might come in handy. The forest was eerily quiet as they made their way toward the clearing where Nathan had seen the alien ship. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath, as though the woods themselves were waiting for something. Nathan led the way, his footsteps cautious but steady. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see one of those insect-like drones hovering behind them. Max trotted ahead, sniffing the ground and occasionally stopping to bark at nothing in particular. Emily followed closely, her eyes scanning the trees for any signs of unusual activity. When they reached the clearing, the first thing they noticed was how normal it looked. There was no trace of the ship, no scorched earth, no broken branches. Nothing to suggest that anything extraordinary had happened there. It was as if the entire event had been erased from existence. "Are you sure this is the spot?" Emily asked, looking around skeptically. "I'm positive," Nathan replied, crouching down to examine the ground. "It was right here. I remember the tree line, the way the light hit the leaves." His voice trailed off as he spotted something shiny, embedded in the dirt. He picked it up carefully. Was a small piece of twisted metal, smooth and cold to the touch. Its surface shimmered faintly, like oil on water. Emily took the fragment from him, turning it over in her hands. "This doesn't look like anything we've ever made. It's too perfect." She frowned, examining it more closely. "And it feels lighter than it should." Nathan nodded. "That's what I thought too. Whatever it is, it's not from Earth." They spent the next hour searching the area, combing through every inch of the clearing and the surrounding woods. They found more fragments of the strange material scattered around, along with claw marks gouged into the bark of nearby trees. Some of the marks were massive, far too large to belong to any known predator. "These aren't random scratches," Emily said, running her fingers over the grooves. "They're deliberate, almost like symbols. Do you think whoever or whatever made them was trying to communicate?" Nathan shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it was just marking its territory." As they continued their search, Max suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, growling low in his throat. His ears flattened against his head, and his tail stiffened. Nathan instinctively grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her back. "Something's here," he whispered. The forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Then, without warning, a loud crack echoed through the trees, a branch snapping under. Immense pressure. Nathan and Emily turned their flashlights toward the sound, but all they could see was darkness. "Hello?" Emily called out hesitantly. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her fear. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, only the sound of rustling leaves growing louder and closer. Nathan tightened his grip on the flashlight, ready to use it as a weapon, if necessary. Max barked sharply, lunging forward before Nathan could pull him back. "Max, no," Nathan hissed, but it was too late. The dog disappeared into the shadows, his barks fading into the distance. "Should we go after him?" Emily asked, her wide eyes darting between Nathan and the dark forest. Before Nathan could answer, a guttural growl rumbled through the air, sending chills down their spines. It was deep and menacing, unlike anything either of them had ever heard before. Whatever had taken Max wasn't friendly. "We need to move," Nathan said urgently, grabbing Emily's hand. "Now." They ran back toward the clearing, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they stumbled over roots and rocks. Behind them, the growls grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Whatever was chasing them was fast and getting closer. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, Nathan tripped over a root and fell hard onto the ground. Emily spun around, pulling him to his feet as quickly as she could. That's when they saw it, emerging. From the shadows was a creature unlike anything they had ever imagined. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, its body covered in thick, chitinous armor that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Its limbs were long and muscular, ending in razor-sharp claws that clicked together ominously. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, orbs that seemed to pierce straight through them. For a moment, time froze. Neither Nathan nor Emily moved, paralyzed by the sheer presence of the creature. It tilted its head, studying them with an intelligence that was both unsettling and unexpected. Then, to their astonishment, it stepped back, retreating into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Nathan admitted, still staring at the spot where the creature had vanished. His heart was racing, but strangely, he didn't feel afraid anymore. Instead, he felt curious. They waited a few minutes, listening intently for any sign of movement. When nothing happened, they cautiously ventured back into the woods to look for Max. To their relief, they found him unharmed, sitting calmly beside a pile of shredded metal that looked suspiciously like the remains of one of the alien drones. "Looks like our new friend doesn't appreciate visitors," Nathan remarked dryly, picking up a piece of the wreckage. "Guess we owe it a thank you note." Emily shook her head, her expression a mix of awe and concern. "Do you think it's protecting us, or just defending its territory?" "Could be either," Nathan replied. "But one thing's for sure, it doesn't like those aliens." Over the next few days, Nathan and Emily couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen. They returned to the clearing multiple times, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature, but it never reappeared. Instead, they found more evidence of its presence: tracks, larger than bare paws, patches of vegetation crushed under immense weight, and even more claw marks carved into the trees. Emily began researching local legends, poring over old books and articles in search of answers. She discovered tales passed down by Native American tribes about mysterious beings known as shadow walkers. According to the stories, these creatures lived deep underground, emerging only to hunt or protect their domain. They were described as intelligent, powerful, and fiercely territorial, traits that matched perfectly with what Nathan and Emily had witnessed. "This has to be connected," Emily said excitedly one evening as she spread her notes across Nathan's kitchen table. "The shadow walkers, they're real, and they've been here for centuries, maybe longer. But why would they attack the aliens?" Nathan asked, leaning back in his chair. "If they're so territorial, wouldn't they see us as a threat, too?" "Maybe they do," Emily admitted. "Or maybe they recognize that the aliens are a bigger danger. Think about it, the aliens came here uninvited, setting up shop without caring who or what already lives here. The shadow walkers probably see them as invaders." Nathan nodded slowly, considering her theory. "So, what does that mean for us? Are we supposed to just sit back and let them fight it out?" "No," Emily said firmly. "We can't afford to stay passive. If the aliens win, it's bad news for everyone, including us. But if the shadow walkers are willing to help, you think we can work with them?" Nathan interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "It's worth a shot," Emily replied. "We'll need to figure out how to communicate with them, though, and that's going to take some creativity." As they discussed their plan, neither of them realized just how much effort it would take or how dangerous it might become. But one thing was certain: Redridge was no longer just a sleepy little town. It had become a battleground, caught between two forces neither fully understood. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the Shadow Walkers watched and waited, their glowing eyes reflecting the weight of the choice humanity would soon have to make. Document. Part 1. The sky over Redridge was unusually dark that evening. The kind of darkness that made even the stars seem hesitant to shine. The small town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, had always been quiet, too quiet for some, but perfect for Nathan Cole. He liked the solitude. It gave him time to think, to tinker with old car parts in his garage, and to forget about the world beyond the horizon. But tonight, something felt different. Something felt ... off. Nathan stood on the porch of his modest home, a cup of lukewarm coffee in one hand and a flashlight in the other. His dog, Max, sat at his feet, ears perked up, staring into the distance as if he could sense it too. The air smelled strange, metallic almost, like the aftermath of a thunderstorm but without any rain. Nathan frowned. He wasn't superstitious, but there was no denying that the forest behind his house seemed darker than usual, as though shadows were swallowing the moonlight whole. He decided to take a walk. Maybe it was nothing, just his imagination playing tricks on him after another long day, fixing engines, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Max trotted beside him, tail wagging at first, but soon the dog's steps slowed, his nose twitching as he sniffed the ground. Nathan clicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the thick veil of night. The light revealed nothing unusual. At first just trees, bushes, and the occasional rabbit darting away. But then he saw it. A faint, pulsating glow emanated from deep within the woods. It wasn't natural, not like fireflies or bioluminescent fungi. This light flickered erratically, almost as if it were alive. Nathan hesitated, gripping the flashlight tighter. Curiosity warred with caution inside him. He knew better than to wander into the forest at night, especially alone, but something about that glow pulled at him. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic even. "Come on, Max," he muttered under his breath, more to reassure himself than anything else. The dog whined softly but followed obediently as they ventured deeper. The glow grew brighter, casting eerie shadows on the tree trunks. The air became colder, sharp enough to make Nathan shiver despite his jacket. Then he heard it, a low hum, barely audible at first, but growing louder with each step. It wasn't mechanical, not exactly, but it didn't sound organic either. It was somewhere in between. A noise that didn't belong in this world or any world he knew. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood what could only be described as a ship. It wasn't like anything Nathan had ever seen before. Sleek and angular, it shimmered as though coated in liquid metal, reflecting the dim light of the stars above. Its surface rippled, slightly, as if breathing. Whatever it wasn't human-made. And yet, here it was, sitting in the middle of the woods, like it owned the place. Nathan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Max growled low in his throat, hackles raised. For a moment, everything was still. Then the ship began to move, not physically, but its surface shifted, revealing tiny openings that glowed with an intense blue light. From these openings emerged several small drones, hovering silently in the air. They looked like insects, their bodies sleek and segmented, with multiple legs and glowing red sensors where eyes should have been. Nathan instinctively stepped back, pulling Max closer to him. The drones turned toward him, their movements fluid and deliberate. One of them floated closer, its red sensor focusing directly on him. Nathan held his breath, unsure whether to run or stay put. Before he could decide, the drone emitted a high-pitched whine and zipped past him, disappearing into the trees. For a moment, Nathan thought maybe they hadn't noticed him. Maybe he was safe. But then he heard the unmistakable sound of snapping branches and heavy footsteps coming from deeper in the woods. Something big was moving out there, something much larger than the drones. The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. Even Max stopped growling, his body tense and alert. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the quiet. It wasn't a roar. Like a lion or a bear, it was deeper, more guttural, laced with a primal fury that sent chills down Nathan's spine. The drones reacted instantly, their lights flashing wildly as they darted back toward the ship. Within seconds, the entire area was bathed in blinding blue light as the ship's surface rippled again. Opening wider this time, the drones disappeared inside, and the ship began to rise, leaving behind only a faint hum that faded into the night. Nathan stood there, stunned, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His mind raced with questions. What was that thing? Where did it come from? And what had caused it to leave so suddenly? Before he could dwell on it further, he heard rustling nearby. Turning quickly, he shone his flashlight in the direction of the sound. At first he saw nothing. But then, just beyond the edge of the beam, he caught a glimpse of something, a shadow moving unnaturally fast, too fast to be an animal. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be seen. Nathan swallowed hard, realizing he'd stayed out here long enough. Grabbing Max by the collar, he hurried back toward his house, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. By the time he reached the safety of his porch, his hands were trembling, and his mind was spinning with possibilities. The next morning, Nathan went straight to Emily Dawson's lab. Emily was a biologist who had recently moved to Redridge to study nocturnal wildlife. She was smart, curious, and always eager to help when someone needed answers. Nathan figured she might have some insight into what he'd seen, or at least wouldn't dismiss him outright. Aliens. Emily raised an eyebrow when Nathan finished recounting his story. You were telling me you saw an alien spaceship? Last night. I know how it sounds, Nathan admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I swear, Emily, it was real. Those drones, they weren't from around here. Emily leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. Okay, let's say I believe you. What makes you think they're aliens? Could it have been some kind of experimental aircraft? No way, Nathan said firmly. That thing didn't look man-made. And those drones, they acted like they were alive. Plus, there was something else out there, something big. Whatever. It was scared them off. Emily frowned, intrigued despite herself. Something big? Like what? I don't know, Nathan admitted. But whatever it is, it's probably still out there. Emily sighed, setting down her pen. Look, I'll admit, your story is fascinating if completely insane. But if you really think something's going on, we should check it out. Who knows? Maybe we'll find something interesting. Nathan nodded, grateful for her willingness to listen. Together, they decided to investigate further, starting with the site of the encounter. As they prepared to head into the woods later that afternoon, neither of them realized just how much their lives were about to change, or how dangerous the truth might be.